Hello and welcome to Continuing Clockwise, a channel about games, gamers, and gaming. This is the last of 3 episodes about my 5th edition D&D campaign, which started about 3.5 years ago. In this episode, I talk about integrating new players into a relatively high-level campaign, the use of the X card, and how I've adjusted my DMing style for a slightly larger group. Then I talk about how my players met their arch-nemesis and immediately threw my best-laid plans into disarray. This stage of my campaign has been a collage of 4 published products: Horde of the Dragon Queen, Princes of the Apocalypse, Out of the Abyss, and the Book of Layers. Stay tuned to hear more. When we left off last episode, I had just started to reflect on the fact that the end of my campaign is starting to come into sight. Let's get back to it. I did feel a little like the main A plot was starting to wane a little. Their connection to the judge didn't feel that strong. Even though the Marauders were emissaries of the judge didn't directly appear during that entire section. And his villainy was just a little abstract. And at the same time, my group had 2 new players join. Neither were people that I knew very well. Both were gamers, but new to this edition. One, frankly, she just plays a glorified version of an NPC. Keeps things a little bit simpler. At this point, I maintain her character for her so she can just come in. She's happy with that. It's minimal work on my part. And the other player essentially has a coach. The player who brought her to the game helps her navigate the complicated factors when making decisions. As we were getting started with this fairly new version of my player group, I made a point of reiterating the group norms as I observed them, and I hadn't really done this with this group really ever before, but I thought it was a good time to start. So I called out, for example, that we don't do that adolescent player versus player stuff. It doesn't mean there's not tension between characters, but we're not the kind of group that's going to have the thieves, pick the pockets of somebody and steal their treasure, or, any of that kind of shenanigan nonsense. I also introduced the X card. If any player finds something that's going on triggering, they can touch the card or show it or indicate to it in a way they don't have to speak, they don't have to say anything, they can just do something as a gesture that indicates to the rest of the group that we need to back off, we need to pivot. It's a way just to make sure that everybody feels safe. The general consensus is that this group probably doesn't really need the X cards. We're not a problematic group. We're pretty sensitive about things. At the same time, it's better to put something like that in place when you don't need it, rather than to wait until there's a problem. I make sure that the X cards are out when I'm setting up for the game, just in case we need it someday. The other thing I did shortly after the new players joined was to explicitly ask for feedback after a few sessions. So how was it going? What suggestions or requests do people have? I found with a larger group, so we're now up to 5 players, 5 pretty kind of eager, chatty players, which is good, that I needed to facilitate the group a little more directly. So I make sure that we go around so everyone has a chance to talk when we're even out of initiative. I also am more proactive about nudging the group forward and off of side conversations. We're all nerds, we all enjoy things. Parts of the adventure will remind us of other kind of cool things we want to talk about. And I've actively started discouraging that during play, because then it just drags things out too long. And so I've been focusing the group a little bit more, and I think that's helped. Back to the action. In order to get the judge a little more directly involved with the player characters, I had the judge send an emissary to them and invite the characters to his home base. The idea was that the judge had failed to summon Tiamat, had succeeded in summoning the demon lords, and had a new project that he wanted the player characters to actually join him with. One thing I've really developed for him is that he likes to just have allies. He likes to find people that can help him. This also provided the player characters with a route towards one of the items they needed for Vizeron's ritual, which was the page out of the judge's grimoire. And this was essentially a free invitation to the judge's home past his outer defenses in order to take possession of the last piece of their series of quests. And as the players went to go meet their enemy, it's worth remembering that they are very powerful now. They are level, I think they might have been 12 then. They just leveled to 14. And in 5th edition, that's a lot of power, especially with your casters. And the monsters they're facing are really complicated and powerful. I found the Tome of Beasts especially, those monsters really have some cool, interesting, zany things going on. So now we're entering a part where there may be some actual spoilers, so if you're playing in the campaign, there may be some things that I say that you don't want to know about. So if you're one of my players, make your own choices with that information. As I was preparing for this meeting, I had a few things to think through. One was that the judge needed a really big dungeon as his home base. I just felt like, this is Dungeons & Dragons. The bad guy should live in a dungeon, right? What dungeon did I want to use? And so I kind of looked back through my existing resources, like is my first go-to. and was rereading Princes of the Apocalypse, which I hadn't really used any of. I had maybe borrowed one little subsection for a one-off. I really like that dungeon in there. You know, it's a series of connected dungeons that are just a lot of fun. And, you know, the plot of that also fits in with the judge's activities. Summoning Tiamat, summoning demon lords. Now the judge is summoning elemental lords, or whatever they're elemental evils. And what I expected the player characters to do was accept the invitation, steal the grimoire either by force or by stealth. We have a high-level thief in the party. The player characters, again, are very powerful. I thought they just might go for it. The most likely thing I expected was for them to take the grimoire and then fight their way out. It's something akin to, you know, The Warriors, the movie from the 70s, where the gang has to really fight its way back, across the city, which is rooted in Xenophon's Anabasis, which I haven't read directly. But the idea is the small group that has to fight its way against incalculable odds. That's a really just fun idea, right? I thought they would do that. I thought they would fight their way out of the dungeon with the grimoire, possibly having fought the judge and probably killed him. Now, they didn't do that. And this is one of the bigger curves that this group had thrown me. So they met with the judge, and instead of attacking him or just sneaking out or really taking any risks, they joined him. They accepted his offer. Now, they did that in order to kind of win his favor. And I realized that during the interaction with the judge, when they had actually come face to face with him, they had asked for a tour or something. And I had responded in character with the judge saying, well, you need to earn my trust before I'm going to give you free access. So they were like, okay, how do I earn your trust? Lucky for me, the session ended there. We were out of time. So that gave me a chance to think through, like, what does that mean? What am I going to do with them? What's that look like? And that might have even been over the holidays, so I think we missed a session or two. So I had plenty of time to think of new, cool, fun ideas. One thing I came to believe was that the judge's depravity was getting a little lost. My hypothesis was that demon summoning and those sorts of things the judge was guilty of was a little high level and abstract, a little impersonal for my players to really relate to. So I added a character, an Aarakocra named Rend, who had been captured and who clearly was going to be dissected by the judge, again, to make it clear the ways that the judge was evil. Second, it was clear my players weren't going to face the judge directly until they really had a sense that they had an advantage over him. You know, I'd set him up as this main bad guy, right? So they're a little tentative around that. They don't feel sure that they can take him. And that's fair. Actually, this is all fair. So I planted this Rumpelstiltskin seed, which is actually, there's some themes of that in the Devil's literature already in Dungeons & Dragons. And my idea is that the judge is essentially a devilish character. So by way of Rend, the Aarakocra, I introduced this idea that the judge has a true name, and if the players can learn his true name, they will have a huge advantage over him. The Tomb of Annihilation has just came out recently, and so I added Chult to Halcyon. So I also added that the elders from Ren's village in Chult know the judge's name. And of course, I was open to other ideas from the player characters. There was the library that they had traveled to before, and now they have the many different teleportation spells. I think they could get there fairly easily. I also needed a quest for the judge to send the players on. Looked through the Book of Lairs from Kobold Press, which is a great resource for dungeon masters, exactly for purposes like this, where I needed something easy to plug into that was level up appropriate and fun. So I chose the Void Citadel, I think it's called. It's for level 14. They were level 13, but good enough. That proved to be a really great adventure. So the idea was that my players needed to steal a dragon egg from some void dragons. I decided to put that lair back in Abulio. As the campaign end approaches, it's time to really pay off some of the seeds that I'd been planting. And also it's an opportunity for me to show them the consequences of those demon lords that have been running around and the risk that is happening, especially to Abulio, as those demon lords continue to have more time to wreak havoc. Over the last couple sessions, they rescued Rend the Aarakocra from the judge's clutches. The judge didn't witness them, but the judge has a pretty good idea of who stole his little project. And they left on the quest that the judge had given them, went to Abulio, went to the Citadel where the Void Dragon was living. By the end of the session, however, they grabbed the dragon egg and fled. Now, Rend was not with them because Rend only has 12 hit points and the player characters are level 13. They still don't have the grimoire from the judge. The judge knows they stole Rend. Oh, and one of the characters has antagonized there was a red dragon that lives with the judge. And one of the player characters was made insane by the void dragon. What is even going to happen next? I don't even know. Looking forward, I could use some input from you. As far as I can think of, I have 3 options for handling the next few steps of this campaign. Option 1 is the basic. I can just lay out the options, lay out the facts of the situation, let the player decide what to do next, and just have some things prepared on whichever path they might follow. The risk of that is, especially with my group, and I know my group isn't unique, is that they can really be indecisive. And so they could spend a long time, and those can be some frustrating conversations when there's just too many options. Sometimes having too much to do is as much of a problem in adventure games as too little to do. The second option is that I can bring trouble right to them, a more railroad concept, which sometimes that's the right thing to do. Maybe have the void dragon find them and attack them, have the judge send other emissaries. I don't know. There's a lot of things I could do to take the larger decision making away from players and have them focus on the tactical situation. That might work too. The third option, which tends to be my preferred, is to leave really clear breadcrumbs. Create a few different paths, 1 or 2 paths where I think they should go. What I have also found, though, as a risk for the breadcrumb approach is my players are just as likely to engineer their own path anyway, which is essentially the same as option 1. I would love to hear your suggestions. What would you do if this was your campaign and you had some things to do next? How would you handle it? What do you want to hear more about in future episodes? Are there spots or details that you want to hear about, products you want reviewed or talked through? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I would love to hear your feedback. If you enjoyed this episode, please click the like button and please consider subscribing. Until next week, happy gaming.